All right, everyone, we're just trying to get the stream going here on social. We'll see if we can come up here and pop up live. Let's see. And we're here. We are live with our first official office hours for Station A. We're just going to wait a second for people to pop on if they want, and then we'll get going in just a minute. Here we go. Let's see if we've got our LinkedIn crew going, checking that. And we're here. Okay, you guys, let's do this. So hello, welcome. This is Station A office hours. We're trying something new here. We want to answer all your clean energy procurement questions. There's a lot out there. And so we've invited our clean energy experts, Leo Menard and Richard Ling, here to answer all of your questions so that you guys can get your clean energy projects done efficiently and effectively. Richard has worked as a clean energy developer on over 100 megawatts of projects. He's worked in solar, EV charging, storage, microgrid, energy efficiency. He's worked for huge municipalities like the Navy and Air Force, and so he's going to be sharing his expertise there. And then Leo has worked in commercial and industrial energy for 10 plus years on things like on-site solar, EV battery storage, demand response, VPPAs, green hydrogen, energy management, and energy efficiency. So Richard and Leo have a ton of expertise to share. We're going to focus in specifically today on just on-site qualifications. That's like a huge part of the puzzle to get us started. And so we decided we're going to start there. I am Noelle. I work here at Station A, and I'll be helping guide us through. I'll be collecting questions in the chat and that have been submitted previously and asking Leo and Richard to share what they know about it. So to get things going, Richard, why don't you just give everyone out there a quick brief on what Station A is and kind of what we're doing here.
Sure. Thanks, Noel, for the intro. And thanks, everyone, for joining. Really appreciate your time today. Like Noel said, my name is Richard. And I'm just going to give a quick intro of what Station A is for those who aren't familiar. I know there are some familiar faces in attendance today, but maybe some others who haven't heard of us. So, Station A, very simply, we are a climate action platform. And what that means is we do two things. The first is we help any corporate of any size, whether you're a Fortune 500 company or a single family mom and pop shop, evaluate which sites of theirs are viable for clean energy projects. So if you own like 100 sites or even just one site, we can turn those addresses into comprehensive clean energy analyses to help you determine what is the actual ROI of doing a clean energy project. And this is done through a flagship tool of ours called the Portfolio Report. And we actually grade each site an A plus, A, B, C, etc., based on its economic viability for a clean energy installation. The other thing to note here is that we don't just focus on solar. We focus on solar, EV charging, battery storage, and also community solar these days. So that's the first thing we do for clients, just determining out of their portfolio of projects and sites, which ones are the most viable. The second thing we do as a climate action platform is our marketplace. And this is when clients say, okay, thanks for evaluating my site, Station A. I want to focus on these top sites for my actual deployment. We can then take those sites into our marketplace and get the clients competitive offers from our universe of providers, which currently houses around 2,000 plus qualified clean energy developers. These range from the top national and global providers like Tesla, Nextera, DSD, et cetera, all the way down to smaller, more regional providers, depending on what you're looking for. So that's our marketplace. And really, that's our flagship product where we actually get you competitive offers and turn your project into a reality. So that's what Station A does. We work with clients, across the spectrum, such as your largest Fortune 500 companies down to your, smaller independent businesses. We're focused on the C&I space, so we're not focused on residential for now, but that's our wheelhouse. And hopefully that clarifies for those who aren't aware what Station A is.
Nicely done, Richard. I would say the only additional piece to add about Station A's background is, we came about because we were disruptive technology, kind of thinking differently about placing on site. We spun out of NRG back in 2017. Our founders really were taking kind of this, um, methodology to think about what are the publicly available data sources that would get you started. And I always use this river analogy to think about where to start. It's just kind of overwhelming if you have many options. There's many markets. Like, what exactly do you focus on? And really, the approach that we've taken to sort of help any size institution or customer think about that in a very stepwise approach. So you can go from concept of we want to decarbonize our buildings to contract and having a true implementation plan. So, um, Noel, what's the best plan here? Should we take questions from audience members, or what do you think today?
Yeah, I'm gonna pop the questions in the chat, and then I thought it would be great for you guys to run through the on-site sort of qualification process, and then I can sprinkle in if as people chime in, and we have a couple questions on deck that I can throw in the chat for y'all.
Awesome.
So Leo, do you want to kick off with sort of like what are the first initial steps for on-site kind of qualification? Where does someone start when they're trying to decide which of a portfolio or suite of buildings or a single building, like how do I get started knowing if this is good for my business plan, good for, does it have good ROI, and how do I evaluate this building?
Yeah, yeah, fantastic question. So I think from the jump, we usually start with just um, clients that come to us with different levels of knowledge of renewables, but also on-site renewables, and we need to understand just where your locations are. So what makes the United States renewable policies somewhat complex is each state has its governance of how you approach net energy metering policy, things like that. Um, but we are not actually having a uniform policy always in a way that you can look. We have governance through the federal government for the ITC values and things like that, but then each state kind of looks at this very differently. So when we kind of start with a client, we actually really just start with your addresses, like Richard alluded to, the portfolio analysis. From there, we can do a cursory look, what we kind of consider as maybe like an indicative first pass, and then that gives us initial grades to work with, where we can start asking questions. Key components to that, I would say, the leased versus owned relationship is always pretty critical. So if you're an owner of your building, you have control and expectations of how the duration in which you're looking for a return. But if you're leasing a building, you might have restrictions based on how long you're going to be in that building. So you actually have to work with your landlord to think about this project and whether or not to install. Based on those characteristics, then we start to drill down to the physical aspects of the building, like the roof condition. Roof condition, if we're going to place something on the roof, matters because these projects exist. The systems usually last for 30, 35 years. So you want to make sure the roofing materials can either hold it or that they're being replaced in concert with a project being developed. All of those require capital. So usually there's some understanding and people that are involved in those types of decisions at the table. But I would say from at least the initial phases, um, asking those questions very early on sets a path and a course that makes the conversation easier if there is something that you want to advance. Um, Richard, do you want to talk about things that we encounter commonly, maybe like to help people address those?
Yeah, and one thing I want to add on what you said, Leo, is another important thing when you're just talking about, I'm interested in doing a solar project as a company. How do I get started? One of the things that people overlook is simply having all the key stakeholders at the table. This is something that we encounter a lot, where maybe it's just one sustainability manager or one facilities manager that is spearheading the project, But the reality is you need a lot of buy-in from across the company in order to actually deploy it. So whether that's getting buy-in from the CFO early, or the ESG team, or the financial team, or the procurement team, all of that is required in order to actually make a project into a reality. So we say the sooner you get those stakeholders aligned, the better you'll be in the far term. So that's one thing just to note on the qualification steps. Um, what I want to talk about now is just what do we see? Like Station A, we've had the privilege to just have our hands in a lot of different projects for various different clients at different stages in their sustainability journey. So I want to talk about what we see as common pitfalls throughout this process and common things to be aware of when you're just starting off. And again, for the listeners here today, you might be at different stages in this, and that's fine. But you might find that this will still be useful because this kind of process to get a clean energy project off the ground is fairly complex, and you might find that some things are even applicable no matter how far along you are. So out of the universe of clients we've dealt with, the most common profile is sometimes these larger companies that have sustainability ambitions, which a lot of companies do. Whether you're a private or public company, you have these sustainability goals. You want to achieve, let's say, net zero by 2040, or carbon neutrality by 2030, whatever it might be. You have these goals, but actually putting into action is the hard part. And this is the part where Station A kind of plays in, which admittedly, yes, it is the harder part, but it is where the most value is created. So the question is, you have these goals, how are you going to reach them? So one of the key problems we see is not just the stakeholder misalignment, but also some basic things. For example, do you have the project budgeted already? This is something where a lot of people need to realize that these sustainability projects are sometimes capital expense projects, not always, and we'll discuss more of that as we go along here. But if you're trying to do a CapEx project and actually owning and operating the installation, then you just got to have it budgeted beforehand. That's something that you don't want to get started and even get into the middle of the process only to realize that you need budgeting, because that'll really stall your timeline significantly. So that's just a matter of aligning with your capital expense team or your finance folks. So that's one thing that we encounter a decent amount. The other thing is just site-specific conditions. Leo touched on a lot of these, so I won't reiterate them. But a lot of the times you have to consider, are we looking for a rooftop project or a parking lot canopy project or a ground mount project? That is the most fundamental consideration at a high level. From there, you can delve into the site-specific conditions that will make those kinds of projects go forward. For example, a roof project, Leo touched on the roof conditions, the age of the building, whether you're an owner or a tenant, all of those things matter. A ground mount project has different considerations, such as if you have site control of that land area, or if you're going to develop on that land area in the future, that's also a consideration. So we like to think of this as kind of top-down thinking, where first you just got to get the fundamentals down, and then you can delve into those details. So those are just some things to be wary of. I also want to be conscious of time here. If we do have questions, Noel, feel free to interrupt me, and we can address those as well. So
I have a specific question regarding facility evaluation. So obviously the roof is important if you're looking at rooftop solar, but what are the other specific, I guess, non-starters or bigger logistical hurdles that you see with building structures? And that's to Leo or Richie, whoever you think's best to answer that one.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this, Leo, and then you can chime in afterwards. So besides the roof conditions, one of the most important things are the electrical specs. Most importantly, what is the kVA of the transformer? Because actually the transformer is one of the key bottlenecks to the system size of the solar system. So oftentimes, one thing that people don't realize is maybe they have a small transformer, but they want to install a very large project, and that might necessitate a transformer upgrade down the line. So one thing that Station A does is we check for the transformer kVA before we enact a project and deploy it into the marketplace to make sure whether or not there needs to be an upgrade for that. That can be a pretty significant thing. The other thing is the amps and voltage of the main electricity service. So specifically what we're talking about here is the amps and volts of the electricity coming into the building at the point of interconnection. That's really crucial as well, because if you don't have high enough amps or volts to accommodate the solar system, you might have to install, let's say, another substation or another electricity panel. So again, those are kind of costs that you want to get in front of before it surprises you. So those things can be, sifted out through things like single line diagrams if you have that, or fact sheets if you have that. Um, and again, those are things that Station A checks for all of our projects. That's the electrical side. So you have the electrical side considerations, the roof specs, and the last thing is just kind of, again on the roof, just making sure that your roof is solar ready. That's very important and often overlooked. What that really means is not just like what's the age of it, but what is the actual live and dead load capacity of the roof? How much weight can it handle? And that's really crucial because the last thing you want is to put solar and have it, crush your roof. So that's something that we do due diligence on as well. But I would say those are some things that come to mind on my end. Leo,
Okay,
if you feel free.
yeah, we have a question from LinkedIn that's around getting traction in the retail franchise space, so where the corp doesn't manage. So I think Leo, maybe you want to take this one. So how do you handle when it's not like owner operated? I think is the question. Yeah.
Yeah, this was interesting because I was going to add to Richard's point. There's also, it's not atypical, right, for a building to be occupied by many tenants with sub metering, which also adds to sort of installation complexity. And this kind of signals towards retail, right, where you might have a portion of the space that's a fraction of the building load. And how do you sort of navigate what your availability or your load intensity is versus how much of the roof you control? And so, how we've kind of looked at this before is really, again, a sort of bottoms up approach where we start with all of your locations, understanding just simple viability. So, really kind of looking at that national look through the portfolio analysis and then drilling down to maybe where you have the greatest opportunities on policy. And then we start to tease out, again, thinking about if you have a corporate or a franchisee that wants to do something, but they need to get corporate buy-in, that's where the stakeholder piece really comes in to a meaningful point. And we see this a lot with tenant relationships generally with landlords, but in the case of like a franchisee, what you can and can't do at your space is somewhat subjective to that group. And so, for example, if it's a capex project, there might be associated dollar values that you could do. So if you need to replace like an oven or something like that, up to $10,000, that's easy. You can make that decision on your own. But if it's a multi-year capex project, like a renewables project could be, a couple $1 million, you need a significant amount of buy-in. And so that's where we try and help maybe pave the way for a repeatable process that ensures that the stakeholders that need to know or would greenlight those capital expenditures can help you facilitate it. So, Richard, do you have anything to add on that, or did I hit the points?
No, I think that was good. And for what it's worth on this question of retail and franchise space, there are a lot of retail and franchisees that want to do solar. And one of the things to be aware of as well is that these are not going to be huge installations, most likely for a franchise, let's say restaurants in that matter. If you're thinking about your Burger Kings of the world or Chick-fil-A's, there's not a ton of roof space here. So it's going to be like small distributed projects, for instance. And so the ROI for those are different than large warehouses, for instance. And just considering that is also very important. And I don't want to blanket that statement. It could also be larger spaces for retail, such as like different strip malls, for instance. But just considering the owner dynamics there is important. Having buy-in from the owner and the tenant is always crucial, no matter what. And just making sure that you're in a region, also the right utility region, where solar is not prohibited or penalized. We'll get more into this later, but different states have wildly different rules and regulations for solar, as well as different utility regions. So in some states, solar is, not compensated as well in terms of excess solar sent to the grid as other states. So that's another dimension to the equation as well. I think the moral of the story, though, is that retail and franchise space can definitely be doable for solar, even if it's not owner operated or owner occupied. It's just a little bit of complexity that you got to sift through in order to get it off the ground. But thanks for the question.
Yeah, I wanted to like add a spinoff to that. I know we've done projects where the tenant has come to the owner saying they would like to, deploy some rooftop solar, and that was an added layer to the process. What is the approach? Like, what is like the baseline approach to that? If you are a tenant, you're like, I want this, and I have to go through all these steps. Can you kind of give us the lay of the land there?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick this off, Leo. So we had, I won't mention the client names for privacy reasons, but we actually went through a real life scenario where the tenant came to us for a pretty large solar installation, but they were the tenant, and the building obviously had an owner that had its own separate decision making processes. So what we did was basically we said, okay, Mr. Tenant, we're happy to engage with you, but we also have to loop in the owner to get their buy-in for this because they ultimately have the roof rights. Now, the caveat is if your lease as a tenant says that you have the roof rights, that's a different picture. So I won't address that in this example, but just assuming the tenant does not have roof rights, which is the majority scenario. The way to go about this is simply looping the owner into the conversation, presenting the value proposition of doing solar from their perspective as well as the tenant perspective, because solar should be a win-win for everyone if it truly does have cost savings in that location. So really just presenting it from the owner's perspective, what they gain to benefit, and getting their sign off on the project is the key step there. Once the owner approves the installation, it's just a matter of running the plays to find the right installer for the project, which obviously the marketplace at Station A facilitates. But however you do that, finding the installer and then having the owner in the conversation throughout every stage. That's really crucial because the last thing you want happening is you getting down to the contracting of the installer only to realize that the owner has changed their mind, for instance. So the key, again, as we mentioned in the beginning, is making sure that all stakeholders are in the game from the get-go and at every step of the way that they're updated. So that's tangibly how we've gone about convincing the owner to do solar when the tenant has come to us. But Leo, feel free to add on that, or Noel, if there are other questions, we can address those.
I would just say like the other component of this too, right? If you own real estate, you're looking at the asset value, and inherently, whoever occupies the space is going to need to use some form of energy, right? And the advantage you have of investing in a system like this is that your asset in most markets is going to produce for a certain number of years, regardless of whoever's there. And that inherent value at your property goes towards whoever's operating expenses. So if it's triple net leased versus like whoever pays the electricity stands to benefit from it. So I would say like if you're thinking about the convincing an ownership group, sometimes the biggest hurdle that renewables has is the duration of the project and how long it's going to exist, and if it changes hands. So thinking about how you can convey the value over time is a really big piece of, I think, where Richard outlines, an example where the tenant really wanted this, the ownership group needed some help to navigate it. So.
Just some thanks in the chat for that follow-up, guys. So we are actually hitting our half-hour mark, which is sadly what we were going to do for office hours. So is there anything else you want to add about the qualification process before we sign off for this session?
I would just say that, solar is a pretty complex endeavor. And I'll just say solar, there are other EV, clean energy projects like EV charging or battery storage. So, we're always available over email if you guys want to, chat about questions you have beyond office hours. But yeah, it is quite the complex world, but just sifting out the noise from the signal is what we try to do here at Station A. So just reach out to us if you have other questions, and appreciate everyone who joined today.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is in the interim, give us some feedback if this is this is the right way to interact, or if there are other ways or examples or content that you want to see. Give us some suggestions, and we're happily coming back. So thank you for organizing.
Yeah, this is a grand experiment to help you, the clean energy buyer, get what you need. So help us help you. We'll be back in a couple weeks trying it again. So keep your eyes out for us. But yeah, thanks for joining. Richie, Leo, thank you for answering these questions. This was a real treat. We'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.